You're coming through as though your level is really low.
Okay. Well, this is Community and Technology, another edition, broadcasting live from City College of New York, WHCR 90.3 FM. I'm Stu Reed. I'm here with my co-host, Dave Bernstein. Hey, Dave.
Hello.
So,
Do we get to talk about balloons today?
talk about the what? The
Balloons?
loons? Yeah, tell us about the loons. I don't know if our audience knows what a loon is. What is a loon? Sounds like a balloon. Is it a
It's a
variation thereof?
giant Google balloon or a fleet of them that are now above Kenya offering an internet connection.
Mhm.
And they work surprisingly well.
Really?
Yeah. We all can visualize a weather balloon or something like that, a great big balloon. And the original thought was that they would circle the world in the stratosphere or something, and provide a fleet of thousands of them that would provide coverage everywhere, presumably less expensively than the lower satellites that now are going up by the 100.
Mm-hmm.
The advantage is it doesn't need, it's up there. It's a simple transmitter, just like on a cell tower up there. And it doesn't need fancy receiving equipment that right now costs $500 to $1,000 each for the satellites.
So
Sounds good.
how does it work, Dave? How does it simplify the process? Can you break that down for us a little bit?
Well, it's a lot. The balloons are up there. I don't know. I assume something like 40,000, 60,000 feet, but I'm not sure off the top of my
Okay.
head. That's an awful lot higher than a tower and covers a significant amount of the country.
Mm-hmm.
In Peru, 4 or 6 of them covered most of the country, and Peru is not a small country.
Wow.
Yeah. Well,
Wow.
when you just visualize the triangle, you put a simple transceiver similar to the radios and remotes that are used in a wireless network up there,
Mm-hmm.
and they work. The problem was originally that it was going to be rather difficult to track and follow the thousands of balloons going around the world and to make sure the coverage was consistent and that as the balloons moved, you didn't lose your connection without being
Right.
able to pick up another one.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is you can't steer a balloon, can you?
Not that I know of. I mean,
So,
are they above atmosphere? I mean, are they subject to winds?
no, they're not above atmosphere. They're above thick atmosphere,
Okay.
but they have to be, they're up there. You can't just put a rudder out
Mm-hmm.
or trim the sails or anything like that. And it was assumed they would just float passively around the world. So you needed an awful lot of them. Very pleasant surprise. The launch site for the testing that Google was doing, and they put millions into this, probably hundreds of millions,
Mm-hmm.
was in Puerto Rico. And there was a catastrophe in Peru. Was it an earthquake? Knocked out much of the wireless coverage. So the Google folks said, let's see if we can help. When they did, they discovered that even though it's impossible to steer a balloon, they, in practice, could steer the balloons well enough to keep them on point for weeks and months at a time. How? This is the interesting and surprising part. And there was a science article about it, or scientific article about it, that almost nobody read, and none of the reports about how these balloons will serve Kenya has picked it up. The winds vary enormously at different altitudes, constantly.
Mhm.
While you can't steer the direction of the balloon, you can move it up and down by dropping ballast and doing other adjustments to the gas there and so on. You can move a balloon with weight. And they found in practice that by measuring the air currents and moving the balloon to the air current that happens to be taking them in the direction they want to go, they could do a pretty good job of staying on point. And that's what that makes it far more economical and practical. They've been doing demonstrations. As I say, the Peru emergency work was the first big one. And they now have signed an agreement with Kenya to put the balloons up there with transmitters, and they're working with the local phone company to have coverage where the phone company doesn't. This is the hope. The hope is that this will prove to be the cheapest way to bring coverage where it's impractical to reach people with cell towers. It's looking real good. This is in operation. It's going to be widely available in Kenya. And Ceylon was testing. And if it works, this will be a practical way to reach the 300 or 500 million people on Earth that will not be reached by wireless towers and the like.
Wow. You know, it's amazing, Dave. I know a little bit about satellite technology, and I remember, I'm rewinding back a few decades with the geostationary satellites, where they'd be up in the air, and because they revolved around the Earth at the same speed that the Earth rotated, that they appeared to be stationary in the sky. And because of that, you could point a dish at them from the Earth, and it would always be pointed at it. And I guess I'm still trying to get my head around, how does this work with these balloons moving around and blowing around? I guess the window must be wider in terms of the connectivity between my device on the Earth and the balloon in the air. Is it not quite point to point? It doesn't have to be aimed directly at it. How big is the window? Do we know anything about the math of how that works? It just seems pretty amazing to me.
As I say, it's big enough that half a dozen of them could cover just about everywhere in Peru, as long as they didn't drift too far.
Wow. Now,
well,
are they using it for cell phone traffic, or the internet traffic, or both?
If you have internet traffic, you could do voice over the internet just fine. That doesn't work that well with the geosynchronous satellites because of the speed of light. Geosynchronous satellites are up there at 22,000 miles.
Right.
22,000 miles back and forth is the better part of 50,000 miles. Most waves go at 186,000 miles per second. So there's a constant delay that's at least a quarter second and sometimes as much as half a second, which works fine. That's how all the satellite phones that people are using on ships at sea, for example, are working today all the time. It's annoying. And for mass use, they're thinking they have to change that. The solution from the satellite guys works. Instead of putting a satellite up there 22,000 miles, which is enough to cover half the United States because of the angles that you have, and putting an antenna there that you align when you install it, like you do for a DirecTV or Dish TV feed, when you're at a lower level in the satellites, 100,000 miles up instead of 22,000 miles up. Those satellites are moving relative to you awfully fast. And you need an antenna that's capable of tracking them fairly accurately, because any signal coming from space has to be weak.
Right.
The cost of you can do that two ways. Traditionally, it was done with fancy mechanical parts that were expensive and problematic to keep in good repair. That is how they've done the demonstrations with Elon Musk SpaceLink, which has several hundred satellites up there, is starting to go into beta, and is being proposed to do the coverage from the FCC mandate funded for the remaining 3,7 million homes that they want to spend $20 billion to cover, which Joe Biden has put in his neck, which is the current FCC plan that is funded by that universal service charge that drives up your phone bill, 20%, which is a lot. And it was intended to pay all the little phone companies out there and the big ones as well. Charter wants to come in for as much as 2 million of those lines. But it's not so easy to put a $500 or $1,000 box on everybody's roof and repair it. So the hope is a antenna that doesn't have to move. This stuff is standard in the Defense Department all over the world, also very expensive, uses fancy materials and very sensitive receivers, and is promised for a few $100s a unit by at least two companies, and Musk, SpaceX, thinks he's going to be able to do it, but
You're
hasn't
talking about
been
the low
delivered.
orbiting satellites right now, right, Dave?
That's the low orbiting satellites.
Yeah, okay.
The balloons have none of these problems.
Mm-hmm.
They have enough power to put out a cell signal, and then instead of they're 5 miles up or 10 miles up instead of 100 or 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
So you can just receive this fine. It's working.
So Dave, what kind of, what's the business model? What are the economics? Does Google have a relationship with a local telecom in Kenya and
Selling it through the local telephone company.
Uh-huh.
And that's the difference between this and what Tesla wants to do and what Amazon wants to do.
Mm-hmm.
Who want to sell it direct. That blows the economics because of the cost of acquiring customers. And it also has a problem in that most countries do not want the American internet giants or Elon Musk, who, remember, is close to President Trump, or had been. He got upset about something or other, I think global warming, deciding what's on their internet. So there are lots of problems that are potential that are solved by selling it to the local phone company.
Right.
And nobody talks about it. But one of the reasons the FCC wants this is that if a country decides to cut off the American internet, they can now.
Mm-hmm.
China is obviously doing it.
Right.
India is increasingly doing it. They've shut down the internet for months at a time across the huge disputed province of Kashmir, where India and Pakistan have been going to war for the last 60 years or so.
Let me just interrupt for 1 second, Dave, just to let our listeners and viewers know that you're listening to WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. and you're listening to Community and Technology with Dave and Stu, and we're talking about loon technology and satellite technology that's helping to bring internet connectivity and wireless connectivity, cell phone connectivity to parts of the
And
world
it
where
works,
difficult.
and the economics have to be proven.
Mhm.
The engineering still has kinks to work out.
Right.
And let me ask you to take another topic while I research some of the details that I didn't get exactly right here.
Okay. You know, one of the things that I wanted, a little bit of a sidestep that I wanted to talk a little bit about is we all know about net neutrality, and there was a lot of talk a couple years ago when Trump's guy at the FCC, Agent Pye, came in and essentially reversed all of the net neutrality regulations that had been put in place under President Obama. And a lot of folks were concerned that it would be essentially giving a green light to some of the big giant telecom operators to set up fast lanes and slow lanes, if you will, to actually give preference to big providers that paid them for fast delivery, such as Netflix and others. And you know, they got a lot of pushback from the FCC. Oh, that's not going to happen. The carrier said no, they weren't going to discriminate. Well, a couple of things have happened lately. One, AT&T is now excluding HBO from their data cap calculation. And essentially what that means, if you have AT&T, you have a cap on how much data you can use in a given month, depending on what plan you have. What they've done is because they have some business relationship with HBO, well, as an AT&T customer, you can look at HBO on your device, on your mobile device, and whatever usage you use there will not go against your data cap. So essentially, they're giving a free ride to a programmer that they have a business relationship with, whereas other programmers would be subject to the data cap. Other programmers, whether it be Netflix, whether it be some other streaming service, would go run up against that data cap. So that's one of the first kind of blatant examples of what happens when net neutrality goes away. We don't know whether or not there's going to be some other copycat going on with other carriers and other programming services, but that certainly is a red flag. Another thing that happened, all this just within the last week, is with Cox Cable. Apparently there is a particular user in one of their areas for Cox Cable that has been doing an extreme amount of uploading every night from midnight to 8 a.m. in the morning. And the customer has unlimited service from Cox, but apparently he's bumping up against some unspoken limit that Cox has. And they are now threatening to not only cut him off and throttle him back, but they're threatening to cut back the entire neighborhood. It's not clear whether or not they are hoping that the neighbors will exert pressure on this particular customer or what, but they are saying that this customer is violating the terms of service. And even though he has unlimited capacity, you know, unlimited is not unlimited. So again, you know, net neutrality and really open season for the carriers to kind of make their own rules in many ways in terms of what they will allow and what they won't allow. So that's something we're going to keep an eye on. And you know, Dave, when he comes back, may want to weigh in on that as well.
Let me. I do have the details on this. I've looked at it very closely. First, the preference of AT&T for their own HBO is a clear and absolute violation of net neutrality as defined by the people who define net neutrality.
Mhm.
Not as defined by the Internet Society, and not as defined as AT&T, and you can go there if you when you want to. Charter has a petition at the FCC to be able to do the same, with the intent of collecting fees from every large video service that sends video to people connected to Charter's internet, which is
Wow.
quite large. That's what net neutrality has long been about, a toll booth on the internet. And that was eliminated by our current FCC. Charter, as part of their merger with Time Warner, agreed to respect neutrality into 2021 or 2022. And they're now asking the FCC to waive it. And the chairman of the FCC, who has a majority, at least for a few months, does not believe in net neutrality, wildly deceives himself about what's going on, and might even grant it. These are real issues of net neutrality. The one about the guy on Cox who's using terabytes of upload is more complicated. It's not really an issue of neutrality. It's an issue of how much, what should he be able to get unlimited service, which is not an issue on a telco, but is an issue for cable companies in some locations, because several hundred homes share the same connection and they don't have enough upstream bandwidth.
Mhm.
How severe is this? Well, Cox never sold, or any of the, never sold unlimited upstream. There were always limits that were almost never called on because they weren't needed. But that's why the my Charter Time Warner connection maxes out at 10 megabits upstream, which isn't enough if you do video professionally like Jenny does. But that's the way all the cable networks in the US, depending on the location, they have between 30 and 70 megabits of upstream. They were going to build much more, but they put it off because they thought people didn't care. Getting back to the case in Cox. The Cox and everybody else, as part of the FCC mandated response to the pandemic, did say they would offer unlimited service. This guy's testing it enormously. I don't know what he's uploading, terabytes at a time, which is a lot. Cox has said, well, we're going to put limits that will affect very few people, and they will be very high, which is what they're actually doing. They said they are limiting the most extreme, or those who upload the most in less than 3% of their network, the sites where they really are having problems serving everybody because one person is using it so much, or two people are using it so much. And they want to do that by limiting him to just somebody like this to a few terabytes a month. Nothing to do with the content. So it's not what net neutrality is usually fought by. It's a matter of the speed or the capacity that they're selling. Most people, including everybody I know who advocates net neutrality, says that selling different speed tiers or capacity tiers is not a violation of neutrality. It may be wrong, however, and that's what this argument is about. And it's a hard one there, because in this case, what Cox is doing is, given the technology that they have that should have been upgraded years ago, but the US cable companies put it off, not unreasonable. that they have a limited capacity and choosing to affect a small fraction of 1% who upload a great deal is what they feel is the sensible way to keep under control in the limits of their system. Now, the solution, of course, is to improve their upload. And that was built into DOCSIS 3.1, has been available for 3 or 4 years, was supposed to be implemented 3 or 4 years ago. And the cable companies decided customers didn't care that much about upstream and decided not to pay for it. And now, so they came up with a new generation of sharing the same spectrum between upstream and downstream, which works in the lab but hasn't made it to the field. And they decided to wait for it because it was going to be much cheaper, they thought. All of which I can bore you at great length. In any case, we have a government that believes the phone company should do whatever they darn please. That will, we hope, change in a few months.
Yeah.
Joe Biden's positions for the Democratic convention have just come out, and it's a strong, simple statement supporting net neutrality.
Yeah. Before we change the subject, Dave, I just wanted to circle back for a minute, just so that our listeners and viewers could kind of understand the impact of the Charter situation, where you're saying they are going to start charging the big video streaming services for carriage on their network, or at least that's what they're asking the FCC to be allowed to do. And if and when that happens, I would imagine those costs are going to be passed on to the consumer. Do you think that would be the case?
That's what they intend to do. They're a business that wants to make money. They're no more or less evil than the average corporation. In Charter's case, they're doing a lot of obnoxious things like busting the union in New York City. So they are not an average corporation. But how much will it affect us? Well, we haven't had neutrality for several years in the US. Has it brought the end of your internet, Stu?
No, not that I can see. Not yet, I would say. But this move by Charter that could really affect folks in their pocketbook pretty directly if all of a sudden, there's a 20, 30, 40% surcharge on Netflix and or your other streaming services, Hulu, whatever it is. That can have a pretty direct and quick impact.
So the question is, the impact is going to be a matter of what the level is. And the people inside the cable networks themselves are saying they have to keep it reasonable, more like 10 cents a month to Netflix or 20 cents a month, than enough to really make a big difference. But 20 cents a month by every subscriber by 3 services adds up to a nice piece of change that the cable companies or AT&T get for doing nothing beyond what they're already doing.
Right. Yeah.
That's the likely impact in the US over the next few years.
Mm-hmm.
In the long run, we're all dead, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And in the long run, if you give them the right to do it, when they have a profit squeeze, say the next wave of the pandemic drives down the number of customers they get, they can extort whatever they like.
Yeah, that's
and Netflix can't do very much about it, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Google has shown that they can do something about it in a similar battle, which is over new paying for news.
Okay, one second, Dave, before you go there, I just want to do our quick station break, bottom of the hour. You're listening to WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. And this is Community Technology with Dave and Stu. And we're talking about net neutrality and technology changes. And Dave is about to tell us about Google News and what's happening with that.
Okay. The Europeans think it's not a good thing for society if all the newspapers die. And the newspapers, of course, have a fair amount of political influence. So they've been starting to set rules that if Google wants to show the stuff in the newspapers, they have to pay for it.
Hmm.
Is this right or wrong? That's another discussion. Is this practical? That's something that we're getting an answer that's distressing.
So Dave, let me just be clear. So you're saying like if I were to search a topic on Google and Google came up with some answers to my search that quoted the New York Times, you're saying there should be some transactional fees between Google and the New York Times. Is that what we're talking about?
Well, it hasn't become an issue with the New York Times, but it is with Der Spiegel in Germany and Le Monde in France.
Mm-hmm.
And there is strong public support for not letting the newspapers die,
Mm-hmm.
which is happening massively around the world.
Right.
And not having local news is, for many of us, we think of a major problem for democracy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like this is being imposed just to raise a company's profits. Well, yes, it is to raise the profits of newspapers, which otherwise, many of which will die.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it may not be possible to do that because Google and Facebook have a response that the government of Germany is too weak to do something about, perhaps. They simply say, well, in that case, we're going to leave out Der Spiegel and Le Monde from all searching. Google has 90% of the search traffic in the world. This will utter and totally clobber traffic to Le Monde and Der Spiegel. And they can't afford it. And it actually happened. Spain was the first with these laws. Google shut down the newspapers, and the newspapers came back. We can't afford to lose all our internet traffic.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, you got them in
so what happened,
22.
one of the issues on the enormous market power of YouTube and Facebook is that they are now more powerful than most governments who cannot rein them in.
Mm-hmm.
This is coming up around the world constantly. In Europe, it's about taxation. They think that Google should pay taxes on the profits that they make in England, for example, and in France and in Italy. It's also come up in Korea, where the Koreans decided that they would have the government set the rules of neutrality and allow the phone companies to collect a fee from all the video services in Korea. That was a political decision they made, that they wanted to support the phone companies and give them the money to build out a better internet, or so they say. And they say, of course, Google is going to have to obey Koreans' law. Facebook is going to have to obey the law of Korea and pay the same fees to the phone companies, which will support our local phone companies and our local economy, instead of shifting all the value from video to California, which for some reason the Koreans don't like. Facebook actually punted and said they were going to start paying. That was about a year ago. It was really important for internet policy, although very few people noticed it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's now happening in India. India, in their last budget 4 months ago, put a small tax, I think 3%, on sales of internet advertising. And Google and Facebook are refusing to pay an ordinary reasonable tax declared by the government of India. They're just stonewalling. Now, what would happen in India, which has, 300, 400 million Facebook users, if the government shut down Facebook? Think of the political storm.
Yeah, I would think the local folks would be extremely upset. I mean, Facebook would probably just be a blip on their radar, but for the citizens of India, it will be a tremendous slap, I'm sure, and deprivation.
And that is what Facebook is saying to India, saying, well, if you want to try to collect your taxes, we're going to shut down every Facebook user in India and your government is going to collapse.
Hmm.
So that we have lots of issues here in the US with the power of the web giants. They have even more power in places like India, where they often have been telling the government what to do. It's very blatant exercise of political power. And that these are issues that I don't have simple answers for, but I certainly don't believe that simply saying the internet giants can do whatever they darn please, including not paying taxes anywhere. They're brilliant at tax evasion. Did you see the news today on Apple?
No, I didn't. What happened with that?
The EU said that they had to pay $13 billion in back taxes.
Who did?
The European Union.
Oh, you're okay. EU. Mm-hmm.
Declared that Google would have to pay $13 billion, Apple would have to pay $13 billion in back taxes.
Wow, that's a big number.
They took it to the court, and the judgment came down today that no, Apple does not have to pay $13 billion of taxes because they used loopholes in EU law that allowed them to take all the money they were making in France and England and Germany, claim it was being made in Ireland. Ireland had already agreed with Apple to charge them almost no taxes to get Apple to invest in Ireland instead of Germany or France or England.
Mm-hmm.
And the court in the EU has now said, the European Union said, this is an unfair subsidy from the government of Ireland to Apple. And Apple has now just won in court and apparently will not have to pay $13 billion in taxes they've been avoiding.
Wow.
That's a problem with anything on the web, that where is the locus of a company? Well, they're going to put it where they don't get taxed.
Right, sure. Mm-hmm.
And there always are going to be a Luxembourg or an Ireland, small countries that wouldn't have got much tax from them ordinarily, that will cut a deal that they pay little or no tax. In the case of Luxembourg, in many cases, it was zero tax. And some people think large profitable companies should pay taxes, that they'd rather not close schools and hospitals. I don't have any simple answers to that either. I was very discouraged when the European Court ruling came down today.
Wow. You know, it's incredible, Dave, the amount of power. I mean, a little earlier you mentioned that some of these tech behemoths are more powerful than many governments. And you're talking about some of the financial levers. And that's, of course, maybe the most powerful aspect of that. But then you look at the political influence in terms of what they publish or don't publish, and just the way that they can make their own rules about what is acceptable speech and what is not acceptable speech. And, you know, given that power of the press, if you will, even though they're not regulated as publishers, they have that power as well. And when you fold that in with the economic power, I mean, I don't know that there's any way to even slow these juggernauts down. They may be running the world another decade or two. Wow.
Wait a minute. Another decade or two?
Or maybe they are already, we just don't see it, huh?
Well, we do see it on some very big issues. And in fact, Tim Cook of Apple and Jeff Bezos of Amazon and Sundar Pichai, is that the name that I'm thinking of, Google,
The Google guy.
next week are going to be testifying to the Antitrust Committee in Congress. And there still are a lot of people who think that the government should make the laws, not these companies. Now, what is the response of those companies, do you think, knowing the corruption of Washington? Facebook has become.
Yeah, they're going to pay their lobbyists tons of money to get the legislation that they're looking for, or to avoid the legislation that they're looking for.
$17 million is what Facebook reported. Since most things don't get reported, that means that they're spending well over $100 million to affect the climate of opinion in Washington and make sure and persuade those in Congress that they should not do anything to limit the power of Facebook and Google. They will probably have some nice words, just as they do for all the Black Lives Matter protests. They will probably make some concessions that are insignificant, and they will probably accumulate more and more power. Did I bring this to the air, the current value of 5 companies on the stock market?
No, I don't think we've talked about that. The 5 big tech companies combined value?
Yeah, $6 trillion.
6
5
trillion.
companies.
That's 6,000 billion.
Yeah, that's a lot. They're the most valuable companies other than the Saudi oil companies anywhere in the world. Their value has gone up, and Jeff Bezos's personal income has gone up by over $1 trillion since the pandemic started.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. The stock market has decided that these companies have so much power that they will be able to keep making disproportionately high profits, and that the pandemic, by wiping out some of their smaller competition, will give them even more power. Right or wrong? I think anybody listening to this can make up their own mind without my telling them what I think.
Wow.
Yeah, I have the details on Loon, and it's really fascinating.
Okay, let me just remind our listeners that you're listening to WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem, community and technology, with Dave and Stu. We've been talking about some of the latest advances in technology enabling delivery of wireless access and cell phone service to remote areas at a much cheaper cost than previously before. Dave, fill us in on some of the Loon details.
I'm at loon.com reading from their facts.
Okay.
They're straightforward, and I can confirm them. Are the balloons stationary? No. A group of Loon's balloons create a network that provides connectivity in the same way a group of towers on the ground would. The difference is that our towers are constantly moving with the winds in a given area. We provide continued connectivity below by ensuring that when one balloon moves away, another is nearby to replace it. Our system is constantly learning to improve. How high do the balloons fly? We fly in the stratosphere, well above commercial air traffic and weather events, at 60,000 to 75,000 feet. How long does the balloon stay up there? Our design can last for hundreds of days. Current flight record is 223 days. How is the movement of these balloons controlled? The positioning is adjusted and controlled all the time from Loon Mission Control, using a combination of automatic planning algorithms and human oversights. And then they go on to say that when the balloon's time has come, there's a limit to how much gas the balloon can have, especially because they're using that gas and the temperature to move the balloon up and down for the wind currents they want. And they let them down, release the gas to make them small, and have a parachute that lands and they track with GPS.
Mhm.
Will they hit airplanes? Well, airplanes fly at 30,000 feet, not 60,000 feet, and they coordinate with air traffic control and so on. And what equipment is on? It's a ordinary LTE based, not an ordinary, extraordinary custom design LTE based station that connects to your LTE phone. How fast? They've seen internet speed similar to that of current LTE, which in the places they're testing is god awful, probably 5 to 15 megabits a second. How many people can it serve? Oh, I have this wrong. They were reaching most of Peru with a handful of balloons, but they're saying it covers a ground area of about 50 miles in diameter. Now, that's pretty big. That would go from New York down to Princeton and up to Bridgeport, Connecticut. But it means they need dozens, not half a dozen, to cover a country like Kenya or Peru. And partners. How can I partner with Loon? Loon is committed to extending connectivity, including a partnership with a mobile network operator in a specific country. That's the difference between what they're doing and what the satellite guys want to do, which want to be able to get the Voice of America through and the Voice of American advertising through to people, no matter what the government thinks.
Yeah, direct to the end user.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that is how the balloons are going to work. They're now going from testing to a real deployment in Kenya, and they're working with numerous other governments who are going to watch Kenya and may follow up. Why is Google doing this, do you think?
Probably to get a foothold in some of those countries where there is no other giant like them. Just as Facebook is dominating in India, Google probably wants to get a foothold in many of the rural parts of Africa and South America and other parts of the globe. And you provide the internet, it's the old closed loop walled garden. I'd imagine. I don't really know, but I know that Facebook initially, that's how they were marketing themselves. They were marketing internet service, but it was really an expanded Facebook service, and you can only move around within certain parameters. I wouldn't be surprised if Google is doing the same thing. But
well, so far Google isn't doing the same thing, and they don't need to, because Google already has such domination of the internet that they know if they bring the real internet, a decent version of it, anywhere, they will make money on the people who connect.
Right.
Now, you can't say that about Comcast or Verizon or anybody else on earth except 2 to 4 internet giants that already have such a dominant position in the internet that anything that grows the internet, they will benefit from. And that's been explaining part of what Google has been doing for 20 years. Google is enormously supportive of internet services. You go to a website and it gives you pictures to fill in to prove that you're a human and not a bot. That's a free Google service. You use a font on your website if you choose from the 700 Google offers. Google sends that font to my website quickly, faster than I could any other way, at no charge. And Google has the enormous advantage that anything that improves the internet pays off for Google. That's a little less true for Facebook or for Amazon, but they see it in a similar way. It's not true for any company that's not $1 trillion company, or at least a $600 billion company, which is what Facebook is these days.
Yeah.
Apple is $1.5 billion. Google is $1 billion. Microsoft is almost $1.5 billion. Amazon's $1.5 billion. That gives them enormous power. So when we're talking about them having more power than governments, no, they don't have an army. There's some things that they couldn't do, but they have more power than most governments, probably including the American, in many, many important decisions on Earth.
Yeah.
That's the reality, and what you do about it, people are debating.
You know,
What else do we have this week?
information and communications. I mean, that's where the real action is now. We're kind of winding down there, but I wanted to get a quick recap from you. One of your favorite subject areas is 5G. If you can give it to us in 2 or 3 minutes, just what's happening with 5G.
Okay.
I read a couple of stories that said that they're having problems marketing it. What's your sense of where it is?
Well, there are 80 million people who've connected in the last 7 months. There will be 200 million people connected by the end of this year. That's pretty successful marketing, you would think.
Is that global or U.S.?
Those are global numbers.
Okay.
And of those numbers, 63 million plus of the 80 million are in China.
Mm-hmm.
And China will have over 150 million by the end of this year, which is why I'm confident of giving you a worldwide total of 200 million.
Mm-hmm.
Korea, a much smaller country, has about 7 million. More than 10% of the people have transferred to 5G. The West has very, very few because we've made it so expensive and the phone companies haven't spent the money to put the equipment out there. Verizon, do you watch television enough to see Verizon ads about 5G done right?
Yes, I do.
0.4% of the United States can get Verizon's 5G at this point.
0.
Actual number, open signal testing.
Wow.
So we're way behind.
Mm-hmm.
And does that matter? Not very much. Okay, 4G is now routinely 75 megabits a second. That's the actual tested speed at TELUS's number 2 independently tested speed at TELUS Canada's number 2 carrier. What can you do if you had a 5G speed of 150 megabits or even 300 megabits that you can't do at 75 megabits? That's a question for you.
I can't imagine, Dave. If I had a high def TV studio here in my home, maybe I could streamcast multiple streams of high def, 4K content out across.
Each of which is about 15 megabits. So on the current LTE, you probably could only do 3 or 4 of them. That's enough for most practical purposes.
Sure.
Again, actual tests, open signal, millions of tests from cell phones that connect through their network and are tested regularly. The latency is about the same on 4G and 5G at this point. That the 1 millisecond you're hearing is nonsense. And both 4G and 5G, if the phone companies invest in a whole lot of servers all around the country, thousands of them, will come down closer to 15 milliseconds. That will happen in China and in Reliance Jio in India and at Rakuten in Japan. Nobody in the Western world has made a commitment to that investment. And I know this in depth because I earn my living writing things for the telephone companies, like whether or not they can make any money doing it, and it's not clear, and none of them are committed to moving ahead. So 5G is coming along just fine. Decent phone, 6.5 inches, 3 cameras, the whole bit, are now $230 to $260 in China. They will be down to $150 by the end of the year. 60% of the new phones sold in China are 5G. Over time, we'll have the same thing. And our speeds may go up to 100 to 300 megabits. Current 5G at AT&T, Sprint, and T-Mobile, again, open signal testing, 50 or 60 megabits, slower than 4G. That's reality. And the campaign to persuade you that 5G is going to change the world, well, a whole lot of untrue things are, are persuading people these days. This one is less true than many of the other things you hear coming out of Washington. Enough?
Okay, well, that's the wrap up, huh, Dave?
I hope so.
Okay. Well, thank you. We're out of time now. You've been listening to Dave and Stu on community and technology on WHCR 90.3 FM. Stay tuned every Wednesday, 5 to 6 p.m. for more tech talk on community and technology. Stay tuned for more community programming, WHCR 90.3. Thanks for tuning in.